Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
Sorry to miss you last week. I had a busy schedule last week, but back just in time for the articles of impeachment, and with about I think they've got 1 week till the next debate, if I remember correctly. So the Democratic primary is definitely starting to get a little bit more intense as we get closer and closer to caucus day.
What'd you make of? So I guess the Biden people are pushing back on this, but there was a Politico story about how Biden may just be a one-term, just want to serve one term. And there was a lot of criticism of it. And I see there's a reason why nobody else does this, right? There's a reason why John McCain didn't vow to just serve one term. But I feel like it's not an absurd idea. And I feel like there's some good that could come from this.
You know, I'm actually in the middle. I mean, I've read about him before, but I was doing a little advanced reading for my presidential book club. I'm reading Polk, the man who transformed the presidency in America. Polk was an avowed one-termer. And he did so because, he was a real, true dark horse candidate. He had been Speaker of the House and was briefly governor, but he just lost the governorship in Tennessee twice. And so he was kind of thought to be, pretty second tier. And Martin Van Buren was sort of queued up to be the Democrat, even though he lost in 36. He lost re-election to Harrison in 1940. Harrison dies, you get Tyler. So we're looking at 1844. And Tyler was pushing to annex Texas, which prompted both Henry Clay, the Whig, and Van Buren to say they wouldn't annex Texas. And that was a safe thing for Clay to do, but not for Van Buren, because other Democrats wanted, in particular Andrew Jackson, wanted to annex Texas. And so that fatally weakened his candidacy going into the convention, and that made Polk sort of live again. But even still, Polk wasn't barreling into the convention. He was really kind of hanging back. He was a late add in the succession of ballots, and he went for the one-term pledge because there are all these other people that were angling to be president as soon as possible, right. And it kept them at bay, knowing that, hey, he's only going to be there for 4 years, and I'll get my shot soon enough. Yeah. And so he got all those also-rans to get behind him.
Yeah. I mean, so that makes perfect sense in a convention where you're literally negotiating with stakeholders to get the nomination. But I think the same principle could potentially be at play, like psychologically, in an election where Joe Biden is basically saying, look, I'm a placeholder. we're going to pass the torch to a new generation, but I'm going to be the person who brings the country together, who gets us past Trump in the interim. It's not a crazy idea.
It's not crazy, and I think the parallel to Polk is, I think there are a good number of people who are hungry for the job. There are a good number of people who aren't thrilled with the idea of an old white male as the nominee, and to have a one-term pledge and have someone who's not an old white male as your number two is basically saying, look, it's not going to be old white men forever. I'm queuing up the next person, and it's all going to be, everyone's going to win. Everyone's going to get what they want at the end of the day. But I do think those arguments are outweighed by the fact that such a move on his part would be coming from a place of weakness. I know you're worried that I'm losing my faculties, so don't worry. I'm not going to cling to this job for dear life. I'll get out of here as soon as I possibly can. That doesn't show a lot of confidence. And I think one of the reasons why Biden is doing as well as he is, despite all of the challenges he has faced, is he has not been campaigning from a place of weakness. He's been pretty brash and pretty defiant that he's as sharp as he always was, and he's not as...
Well, lately he He went after that guy.
And I know it's just one
Iowa.
poll. I know it's just one poll, and we'll see if this is backed up by other polls. But there's only been one Iowa poll in December. There's only been one Iowa poll since the 8-day No Malarkey tour and the incident with the heckler in Iowa. And it's the first Biden poll where he's been in the lead since mid-October. I mean, it's not a commanding lead. It's a 1-point lead. He's at 23%. But Buttigieg had been the hot hand in November. So it suggests to me, and in the same time, like his national numbers have held steady. And he was 1 point behind Buttigieg in New Hampshire in a poll that came out this week. And Buttigieg's lead, Buttigieg was like 18%. So it's all kind of clustered at the top there.
Yeah.
So that posture for Biden is working, and I don't think him sort of leaning back would be the right direction for him to go in right now, because it's already going to be assumed he's a one-term president. Now,
maybe that's what this is about, right? You have some advisor float it out to the press, get them to report it, and then Biden's people can then on the record, no. But maybe they want to inject the idea into the public consciousness without actually having to stand behind it.
Right, but it does put, assuming he is the nominee, which of course is a very premature assumption, a long way to go, it does put in much more pressure on him than anybody else on who that VP would be, because everyone's going to assume this is the person likely to be the 2024 nominee.
Probably good news for Kamala Harris, I would think. Because the pressure is there are two things, right? One, the pressure is to pick someone who is qualified. So Stacey Abrams is not. But I think the pressure is also to pass the torch to the next generation and to keep diverse parts of the coalition, the Obama coalition, together. Pete Buttigieg maybe doesn't do that the way that Kamala might. So right. I think, by the way, it's a silly non-scientific poll, but I tweeted this, a Twitter survey out to my audience. I think 4 or 5,000 people voted. I think Kamala was at about 42% leading. I think somebody else, Buttigieg might have been at 20% or something. So she's the Matt Lewis audience favorite as of now for the running mate spot.
Yeah, I think you got to put Kamala on a short list. He almost certainly has to pick a woman. There is, as the candidate who is doing the best with African Americans, you could argue that he doesn't need to pick an African American the way some other white candidates might, but a person of color would still be desirable, I'm sure. And it's got to be somebody who's young. If there is
Cinema.
Well, I was going to float that. I mean, I think she would be challenging in certain respects because his Biden's weakness with the young is also very ideological, and Sinema would not enthrall any Bernie-crat or Warrenite. But first bisexual on the ticket is not nothing, and young and in a critical swing state of Arizona, so I would not completely, rule her out. I've heard there's been a little bit of chatter about Senator Cortez Masto, in Nevada, who would be, first Latina, on a ticket. Bernie does better with Latinos than Biden does. And that's probably a large part because Latinos as a cohort are much younger. The median age is much younger than with African Americans.
There's something else I liked about this trial balloon is one of the big fears about Donald Trump, not to sound paranoid, but it's simply that he won't leave. I mean, he jokes about not leaving office, and so contrast that with someone who's saying I'm only going to serve one term. That just, again, I don't know if that was part of the intent, but it does reassure people that, like, one guy maybe never leave and the other guy is going to willingly step down after one term.
Well, and Biden's whole thing is, restoring democracy, rule of law, integrity. I mean, that's the kind of thing there's an implicit contrast there that I don't think you have to hit everyone over the head with a one-term pledge to make that point. That's kind of baked in. But do you think that Biden who's got the best shot right now? Is it Biden? Did he help himself with the No Malarkey tour and the exchange with the heckler? Would you say, look, it's still 23% in Iowa, 18 in New Hampshire. It's still very doesn't have a lot of as much second choice support in Iowa that other folks have. That might hold him back. In the poll that came out, it was an Emerson poll. Bernie was in second. I think Buttigieg was third and Warren was fourth. So and Klobuchar was a strong fifth with 10%. So I tweeted that poll out. And a lot of folks are like, hey, look at Klobuchar, she's moving up. And the folks are like, hey, Bernie's just 1 point behind. It's statistical dead heat. If Warren is not meeting the threshold, you got to get to 15%, generally speaking, in Iowa caucus precincts to earn delegates. And if you don't get to that threshold, your people have to move somewhere else. And I just learned this. They keep tweaking the Iowa rules to make it less and less like a caucus to appease the caucus critics that have been sort of formalized in the DNC guidelines. So in the old days, if you didn't meet the 15% threshold, it was sort of free-for-all. Even the candidates that did clear the threshold, those people could move too on the second ballot. They weren't locked in to their first ballot decision. But now, if your candidate clears 15% on the first ballot, or whatever they call it, first caucus, it's not checking a piece of paper, you cannot move. Only the candidates who are under 15% get to shift around, which makes it kind of like a quasi ranked choice voting situation. Although with some chit chat and chatter, you can still kind of work people and try to negotiate their movements.
It's so interesting though, because these rules could be predictive or determinative. I mean,
absolutely. And as I think I mentioned on a past show, one of the new things is they're creating satellite caucuses. So it's not just the one place in your precinct at the school gymnasium. It's also the factory floor and the nursing home, and places where people who it's not easy for them to get to the caucus site. They're trying to bring the caucus to them. So that expands the voter pool in ways that are, I think, hard to get them out. So if Warren's under the threshold, according to this most recent Emerson poll, I think about half of her support would go to Bernie, and Biden was doing weaker on a candidate-by-candidate basis on second choice votes. And so you could plausibly argue, hey, Bernie's really got the inside track here because he's got the lion's share of his second choice votes. I don't know if it's going to work as cleanly as that, depending on where candidates don't meet the threshold, but that's an argument that Bernie's in better shape than you might think.
So you asked me about Biden. I think Biden is doing well, and I think that when he attacks people, the risk is that he's not contrasting with Trump. Right? Trump is the mean, chaotic person, and so the opposite of that would be the steady hand, civil, norm candidate. I think that rather than trying to be a stark contrast to Trump, that the better bet is for Biden to avoid looking old and weak and looking like he can't fight Trump. I think that's a bigger danger. So it's a calculated risk, but I think Biden helps himself actually when he gets involved in these skirmishes. Well,
this particular skirmish was with the guy who was sounding like Trump. He was echoing Trump talking points. If that was against a Bernie crowd, I don't know if the reaction is the same. It
could have been a different dynamic. Yeah.
And just to echo what Biden himself has said, he seems uncomfortable in the Democratic debates when the attacks are coming from the left. He doesn't want to get into that kind of. He's never not engaged Bernie and Warren others on policy matters, but I don't think he wants that to get as nasty. He wouldn't call Bernie a damn liar. He wouldn't call Warren a damn liar. He's more comfortable doing that with a guy who was being a Trump proxy. And at least some Democrats were okay with that. Now, I think to your point about not sounding old, I think the people who are disinclined to support Biden, when they hear him talking about push-up contests, they think he does sound old, and he does sound creaky. It's a weird thing to say. You know, that's what you're going to do to beat Trump? You're going to challenge in a push-up contest? That's silly. So I don't think it was sort of like an A-plus exchange, but it certainly was a hold-his-own exchange. It hasn't weakened his standing, and I think has marginally helped him in Iowa.
Now, Biden really should be careful, because you could send in a ringer. Think about this idea. You send in not you, but somebody, Buttigieg or Trump, sends in somebody to bait him into one of these arguments, and then kick his ass at doing push-ups. That could be the end of it. That could be the end of it.
Well,
especially if it's a guy who looks. It's sort of like a ringer, like a guy who looks out of shape, but he's like the push-up champion of Milwaukee or something.
I imagine Biden would wriggle out of actually doing the push-ups. Like Jerry Seinfeld, I choose not to run.
Yes.
But I am interested. What do you think about the flack Buttigieg has been getting with this corporate consulting work and to I think maybe to a lesser extent disclosing his bundlers? I'm sort of struck at how there's some people who I've heard articulate this is silly. Why, particularly when it's I think people are sort of sympathetic to Warren, who also don't like that her corporate work is being dragged through the mud.
Yeah.
I heard some folks say, this is all silly. They did some corporate work in their younger years, so what? It's got nothing to do with their current positions. Let it all go. But from the Bernie-crat side and from part of the Warren side, in particular, the Progressive Change Campaign Committee, which are formal Warren endorsers, and they've been part of the Netroots left for a long time. They are doing formal, above the radar attacks on Buttigieg on the McKinsey front and the Bundler front. I've seen 2 emails from them, which they changed their the name on their email from PCCC to look what Pete admitted, and they detail various things that he has said. I think putting a bit of a harsh light on it. And I've seen several tweet storms and single tweets where they highlight stuff he said to Rachel Maddow on the subject and so forth. So I can't. It would be wrong to suggest that was coordinated with the Warren campaign. It's very possible people will do this on their own. I'm not even sure they can legally coordinate with that sort of thing. I'm not sure about the legalities of their committee statuses and whatnot. But you're starting to see some real elbow throwing. We haven't seen attack ads yet, and maybe we won't. Maybe they'll be considered too unseemly. But, these things tend to happen as you get closer and closer to caucus day. There was one kind of mildly critical ad from a Booker super PAC. It wasn't really directly attacking Pete, but it was kind of more tweaking Pete as being not the only Rhodes Scholar mayor in the race that Cory Booker has a similar resume. But it does seem to me that the leftist attacks, to the extent that they're happening in a coordinated way, are happening against Pete and not as much towards Biden, at least as of now. Now, of course, if Pete faded and Biden was clearly the former, that would shift in a heartbeat. But I wouldn't be surprised if it's sort of benefiting Biden right now that Pete's getting more of the flack.
Yeah, I think that might be true. I think that's probably true. And it makes you wonder why are these Democrats, is it a personal animosity such as who does this guy think he is? Mayor of Fort Mayor of South Bend, Indiana. Who does he think he is? So sometimes I think personal animosity gets caught up in political strategy. Maybe that's part of it. Or maybe it's just like, look, we can't take on Biden. It'll backfire. We can't take him down, but he could implode. And so if he implodes, we want to be the last person standing. So let's go after Buttigieg. But whatever the case may be, I do think that he is something of a lightning rod right now in the Democratic primary, and that Biden probably benefits from that.
I mean, I don't know if folks left are thinking about it in this level of detail, but folks have tried to attack Biden from the ideological left, and I think people have learned his support isn't from the far left, and so attacking him in that way doesn't affect his current supporters. Buttigieg just tried to be a bit more of a straddler, although I think he has tacked towards the moderate wing over the course of the last several weeks. But he still wants to have a toe in the progressive camp too, and similar to how the Bernie folks treat Warren, if they, when they think you're trying to be a fake progressive, they really get your dander up. So Warren is trying to poach and eat into our socialist movement, even though she's not a real socialist. Well, we're not going to stand for that. We're going to savage your Medicare for All plan. It's a fake Medicare for All plan. And so Buttigieg, I think, is getting some of that residual anger as well. Now, of course, at some point, if they do succeed in knocking him off his perch in Iowa, and Biden is the main threat, you better believe is going to be a clash of the titans. But that's just sort of trying to marshal your ideological forces. Let's marshal the left to stop the center.
I feel like this is just, so far, it's just a process story. I don't think it's hurt Pete. He is just such a compelling person. He's got the military background. He's gay, so that gives him something. And he's just a compelling, charismatic figure. And so I just don't think it's stuck to him. But I think there is a chance that that this could have like a long-term damage to Buttigieg if he is tagged as being like a neoliberal shill.
Which is what the socialist left has been saying for weeks now. I mean, this is their sort of first sort of concrete thing they've been able to hang their hat on and say, you see, we told you, he is in his heart of hearts, a corporate bean counter neoliberal shell. And I mean, I agree that it's probably not going to make him like completely be obliterated. Oh, who knows? But I mean, his hardcore fans probably won't be moved by it. But what we saw with Kamala and Warren, like just the airing of a attack line, of a potential attack line, was enough to make folks say, oh, I didn't know that. Oh, this is not a golden candidate. There's something that could be set up as this candidate. Well, maybe I should think about that again. I mean, Warren did not have a single attack ad run against her. No one attacked her in any kind of seriously brutal way. In the annals of presidential private campaigning, what she went through was pretty light. And she dropped 12 points in the national real clear politics average over the last 2 months. I mean, it's nearly half of the support that she had. And Kamala's support also probably got cut in half. I mean, she wasn't as high as a higher point, but she had that initial.
Neither of them are as good of a politician as Pete Buttigieg.
Well, we'll
like,
see.
He is
I
just
mean,
I think we've seen. He is a natural. I'm not saying he's going to win the nomination, but just in terms of like talent, he is a very talented politician, and I think he's much more talented than either of.
But we have not seen him go through the ringer yet. I mean, we're starting to, and there's a little bit of defensiveness. I mean, and in the to echo the criticism from the left, arrogance. I mean, that's obviously eye of the beholder. But there's a press conference he gave where the reporters were saying, why aren't you going to release your bundlers? And he says, I don't have time to do it for you. And they're like, well, can't you just do this yourself? And he's like, yeah. And they're like, why won't you? He said, because I'm not yet. I mean, I'm not getting the exact quotes right, but he just seemed to kind of really glibly shrug it off, and that really rankled his critics on the left. So obviously, when he's giving a speech in a big arena, he's really good with the soaring rhetoric that makes him look presidential. But the true test is, how do you look when people are going after you?
I think that's right. He seems unflappable to me, but I will agree that we really don't know. You really don't know how good a politician is until the fire comes. You can't really tell if they can take a punch or not until it happens.
And the interesting thing to me about Biden is, I mean, he gets defensive. He can get snide. It's not like he's unflappable. But I would say is blessed. This is where his longevity is a plus. He can be imperfect on the stump, and if you're open to voting for him, I think a party says, well, I know when he's president he's going to be okay. I know he's not going to jump off the cliff because I've seen him as vice president. I've known him for a long time. I know he's not a crazy person. So if he's a little rough around the edges, so what? When you're a new person,
Uncle Joe, that's just Joe being Joe.
When you're a new person and you're like, oh, I thought you were A, but now I see you're kind of B. Now I'm not so sure about you. That's tougher.
Absolutely. And I think, Trump benefited from that. I mean, not that obviously he is crazy, but the fact that he came into people's living rooms on The Apprentice and people sort of knew him for a decade, I think it benefited him tremendously. And so it gave him more latitude, and there was more trust and just that image of him as a winner and as a billionaire, someone who is just a winner. I think it was almost indelible.
So one last Biden question. How would you say overall he's handling the Hunter Biden questions? Because they're not going away. I mean, beyond the heckler, you do see other reporters ask him it. I would say anecdotally, I hear people, in my circles, say, why does he say this? Shouldn't he say that? He needs a better answer for this. And my personal inclination is, I mean, I might tweak his response in a certain way. I might say, but as a general direction, total defiance, pivot to Trump is what you have to. You don't want to go down the rabbit hole of defending Hunter line by line. But do you think, from someone who is looking at it from the Republican standpoint, is there something he should be doing differently that would truly make this go away, or is he doing the best he can under the situation?
I think he's doing well. But before I get to what I think he should do, I just want to talk about the difficulty of the circumstance, which is, I think the problem Biden has is anybody can look at it and see that it's corruption, right? It's not illegal. But when you have politicians whose relatives are making that much money without experience, there's no doubt that they got the gig partly because of who they're related to. I just don't know how you avoid that. Can you tell your brother you can't take a job because I'm running for president? You can't tell another adult to not take a job that they've been offered because it might hurt your political career if it's not illegal. You know what I'm saying? So Biden can't say that.
What I would do if I was Biden, which he seems a little reluctant to do because he probably thinks this is a little bit too much like throwing his kid under the bus. Right. But what I would say is, Hunter's not running for president. My brother's not running for president. I'm running for president. You asked me what I did, and what I did was nothing. I don't care what Donald Trump Jr. does. I don't care what Eric does. I don't care what Ivanka does. I care what The president does. The president's been a grifter. The president won't show us his tax returns. The president has violated the Constitution by trying to meddle, solicit foreign influence. That's what matters.
Biden can't say that because he's already gone after the Trump kids, pointing out, I think fairly, that the things they've done are egregious, right?
But you can talk about in terms of what the president has done to benefit them, not what they do on their own accord. Make it with the presidential action and the action of the presidential candidate. Who cares what Billy Carter did? Jimmy Carter is the president. I mean I think that's what you have to get to, because that puts it on the apples to apples comparison that you want.
What I think he needs to do is, at some point when the time is right, in a one-on-one, very special interview, he needs to talk about what happened to him with his wife and his other son, and how, I mean, think of how Bill Clinton would handle this. It's understandable that, like, he's been through a lot, and he loves his son, and his son has had problems. His son hasn't had a perfect life, but he loves his son, and if anybody has a problem with it, then it's going to be Fist City. They're going to go to knuckle down because I don't know how many people really know that story anymore. And I think it helps. It would humanize it. And I think, again, you have to be careful how you do it. It would have to be in the right forum. But I think that might help explain the story.
Well, what Bill Clinton would have done is completely thrown his kid under the bus, which is what he did to his brother when he was a drug addict, and made sure that he went to jail. But it's not completely analogous here. But I think Joe can say, look,
he would have gone to Arkansas and executed his brother just before the election.
But I think Joe can say, look, bring your Hunter questions.
Did you see the Hillary? I'm sorry, Rob, did you see the Hillary Clinton interview on Howard Stern?
I saw a couple of the clips and I saw just the other day they put the full interview up on YouTube, which they don't usually do. And it's long, so I've been meaning to kind of block out the time to listen to it, but I haven't had the chance yet.
I mean, this is not unique to me at all, but she comes across as so much more likable now, than she did on the campaign trail. And I would for those who haven't listened to it or watched it, I would recommend it. It's quite good.
Well, and there was apparently a little bit of discussion whether she should have done the interview during the campaign, because Howard was backing her over Trump, and her campaign thought that was a little too dicey.
Would she have done the same interview if she was a candidate?
Probably not. Although, I mean, Howard does have a way, I think, of kind of loosening you up, but I'm sure she would have been much more guarded and been a different interview.
Yeah. But so one of the things we talked about is, which I didn't know anything about, was Hillary's mom. Like Hillary Clinton's mom, who was like abandoned by her mom and had this really tough life, just a real tough life that I didn't know anything about. And like Hillary telling that story and talking about it really humanized her to me in a way.
I mean, I think she did talk about that at times in the campaign. We may not have gone into the same level of detail she did on the show, but I did see some ads that had some allusions to that. But obviously, there's only so much biographical stuff she could do because she was kind of a known figure, and you had to get to, the meat of the campaign at some point. But I do. The clips that I saw of her, and quite frankly, when I find her most likable, is when she's shown a little bit of edge. She's not just being a saccharine candidate. Like, I personally like that. Other people don't. But it feels real to me. And I think showing that, like, the Bernie folks were livid that she called the Bernie agenda chocolate milk for everybody. Because Howard said, wasn't that frustrating that every time you propose something, he would go one more and make you look bad.
Right. Did you hear the George W. Bush one about the the inaugural speech.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard that anecdote before, but to have her say it,
it was fun. Yeah, and she kind of did it like the George W. Bush, like that was some weird shit.
But but you do have to wonder. I mean, it is who she is. Like she's not a phony two-dimensional person. She's a three-dimensional person with a range of human emotion, one of which can be annoyance and edge. And if she let that show, sure, some people would say, "Oh, you're not being likable. You're being shrill. You're being polarizing." But would it have come through as authentic and have been better for me? It's hard to fully say. But obviously, these are the unfair challenges that women candidates have to deal with.
Another thing in that she talked about her religious faith a little bit, and I would have liked more of that actually. But
that would have been tagged as being phony for the masses. She's mouthing the words to make you think she's in the middle.
I mean, it's pretty well established that she's it seems like she's a pretty devout Methodist, I think.
Yeah.
So that's consistent with what I heard, but it was good to hear her make like a public confession of faith. And I would have liked to hear more, but again, one could only wonder. People said this about Mitt Romney after the Netflix documentary came out after he lost. Like, what if we had seen that before? Bob Dole suddenly became funny, after he lost in 90. It happens, but it's still an unanswerable question.
So are you saying draft Clinton for 2020? Or are you going to abandon your man Yang? He made the debates. I don't know why you would leave him hanging right now.
I can't quit Andrew Yang, you know that. I've made my commitments.
So Yang's in the debate. Tulsi didn't make it, but she quit before she got fired. She said she wouldn't show up even if she got the...
You can't fire me. I quit.
Right. And we don't have Booker. Actually, I think this is the last day. So if Booker got 4 qualifying polls today, he would be in there. But obviously, that's not gonna happen. Booker's not going to be there. Castro's not going to be there.
Please let that not happen. I want winnowing.
But Steyer's in clarity. There. You got Steyer and Klobuchar, Yang on top of the top 4.
Klobuchar I like in there. Steyer I could do without. I mean, if I'm going to be the arbiter of this.
Does Booker and Castro drop out before the end of the month? Or are they going to be defiant and say, who cares, I'm not in this debate? This field has gotten too white, and we're not gonna quit and let the party, shove the people of color candidates to the side with these ridiculous rebate rules and putting Iowa and New Hampshire up front.
Yeah. Well, they seem defiant, but Bill, I've seen you on Twitter pointing out the absurdity of this. Number one, the field is pretty diverse in some ways. Female candidates, a gay candidate, Jewish, socialist. I mean, there are a lot of ways that this
Asian
field.
American.
There you go, Andrew Yang. And the reason that the African American candidates are not making the debates or dropping out is that African American voters, are supporting Joe Biden, which I think is. I wrote a piece at the Daily Beast this week about how that there's this silent majority of voters out there who could save America, and these are the moderate Democratic voters. And part of that coalition are African Americans who have decided not to be beholden to the identity politics notion of voting for someone based solely on their immutable characteristics. So I think it's actually, a good thing when people are not primarily voting for people based on tribalism, based on that this person looks like me or whatever. So I think for me, the interesting question, though, isn't whether they will drop out. It's when is someone going to endorse somebody? Has anybody dropped out and endorsed somebody yet? I don't think that's happened.
I think Tim Ryan endorsed Biden, if I remember correctly.
That may be.
But that might be it.
I don't remember it.
But I want to add to that, because I've said similar things as to what you just said. But I should also say, it's not solely the job of African Americans to sustain African American candidates. White people have a role in this too.
And the candidates do. The candidates
well, yeah,
do.
Well,
and
yes.
Barack Obama was a great candidate, and he won. And Kamala Harris and Cory Booker are not great candidates.
I mean, Obama won
they have some responsibility.
I mean, Obama won with a coalition. That was multiracial. Jesse Jackson was primarily an African American candidate, not completely. And so, if you just assume if the only black candidates get in the top tier is that black voters vote for black candidates, and that's it, that's not going to get you the nomination. A white candidate that can't get black support is probably not going to be the nominee. To win the Democratic Party, you need a coalition of voters that cuts across demographic lines. And Castro is leaning very hard into Iowa should not be first. The reason Iowa getting disproportionate influence is the reason why the field is shaking out the way that it is, and I think that is not correct. Let
me ask you this: the polls to get in the debates, are those national polls or Iowa polls? Is there some truth to his argument?
No, it's national and early state polls. If you were getting, if you had 6% in 2 South Carolina polls, and that was it, and you were like 1% in everything else, you'd be in the debate.
So the idea that it's Iowa doesn't hold water.
No, I mean the debate criteria incorporates national, which includes non-white voters, as well as the Nevada and South Carolina polls, which cover African Americans and Latino voters. And it's not even the case that the winner of Iowa gets this glide path to the nomination, because a lot of the time the Iowa winner doesn't even win New Hampshire.
Right.
I mean, Biden isn't in there because of Iowa. He's had the hardest time in Iowa. He's largely around because South Carolina has been so dominant there that you never could write him off as long as he was doing well there. So he hangs around now. He's doing better in Iowa.
I understand so Castro is engaging in a bogus argument, but I understand why he would do that. The interesting thing is somebody credible on Twitter, I forget, but somebody said that Castro has been to Iowa more than.
Well, I said this.
He's plausibly credible. Was that you who said that?
I tweeted that. He's been to Iowa. He spent more days in Iowa than any candidate. But Delaney's been there the most by a lot, because he started, a year before everybody else. And Klobuchar has been there like a few more days than Castro. And so it's not like Castro hasn't tried. He's tried to do well in Iowa. And it's not like you can say Iowa has a reputation for ignoring people of color candidates. They went all in for Obama. It's not like they're a bunch of racists in the Iowa Democratic electorate. If you had a good case to make, you would get a hearing there. And so, it's an interesting gambit on his part, because it's at least unique and dramatic to hold a town hall in Iowa about why Iowa should not be the first state in the process. But it's also a little like bold strategy, Cotton. Let's insult Iowa voters, say they don't deserve to go first.
Why did he just insult ethanol next or something? Come on.
I mean, it's it would be a truly bold move if he had a strong argument on the merits. But I think once you drill down into how Iowa actually, Iowa's not irrelevant. Iowa does winnow candidates. You've never had a Iowa finisher 4th or worse become the nominee. Now, of course, things maybe Biden could be a close 4th and still hold on to South Carolina. We never had a situation where someone who was polling strongly in South Carolina came in 4th or worse in Iowa. You haven't had that test before.
Maybe Biden will employ the 4-3-2-1 strategy.
Maybe,
where he comes in 4th in Iowa, Third in New Hampshire.
So yeah. you got to show some.
That's a joke for Rubio fans.
You got to show some strength in Iowa, but if you were only doing well in Iowa and you were Nowheresville in South Carolina, you'd have a very hard time too. Castro's doing poorly everywhere. That's the problem with Castro, as with Booker. And you Latinos have not. I mean, you might argue that you got to start with your natural base, and Castro would need to start with Latinos, and Booker would need to start with African Americans. But Latinos have been pretty strong for Bernie. Again, because that's a younger electorate, and Bernie just continues to crush it with young people. And African Americans have shown loyalty to Biden, not just for the Obama Association, because it's a more moderate part of the electorate, and Biden's the more moderate candidate. All the candidates that came out and said they were for reparations, they're not doing well with African Americans. It's the one guy who, when he was asked about reparations, gave a bizarrely meandering answer that landed on play records for your children and never answering the question directly. That's the guy who is doing well with African Americans. The notion he had to be the wokest candidate, the farthest. I mean, and this also gets to sort of the Rust Belt versus Sun Belt argument that's been kind of churning in the Democratic Party. The Rust Belt argument was that we should lean towards the middle and win back white working class Trump voters in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And the Sun Belt argument was, no, we need to be a bold, progressive party to energize a youthful, diverse electorate to win Arizona and Texas and Georgia. But a lot of the people of color in this party are not that far to the left. So the Sun Belt argument, I mean, you can still argue you should play in the Sun Belt, but going far left to win the Sun Belt, that's not really bearing out in this primary. And I think, Castro tried to go as far left as possible in immigration. Bernie's not your most far left immigration candidate. I mean, he's definitely moved in that direction, but he's got some votes in the past which are not so hot. But that doesn't seem to be the filter which most Latino voters are judging him on. So a lot of premises, a lot of assumptions about how to win these voters are not bearing out in this process.
Yeah. It's been weird. But
we've talked a long time about Democrats. I'm sorry, go on.
I have to go write a column, but what? Anything else we need to hit?
Well, we haven't talked about impeachment very much. Maybe that's fine. I'm not sure what there is to say.
Whatever we say will be changed by the time it airs, too.
Well, we'll let it lie for now.
Okay.
But we can do at least one more next week, right?
Yeah, and let us know if you want us to try to do our very special, Christmas / New Year's episode. Well, we could even do, who had a good 2019, who's up, who's down. Although it's dicey going into Iowa.
Well, the person with a good 2019 is me. I've been right more often this year than most, so I'm ready to crow for our year-end episode.
Well, I hope you do. I want to get you on the record so that it comes crashing down.
2020 might be a different story, but 2019, I'm good.
So, all right, buddy. Thank you, everybody. Great, another award-winning show. Let's be honest. And follow us on Twitter at DMZ Show. Anything you want to plug, Bill?
Nope, I got nothing. I'll just talk to you next week.
All right, see you guys.